My name is Gracie. I run a small design studio out of a sunlit corner of my apartment where plants try to stage a coup every other week. I'm the one who pins mood boards to the wall and insists that foil-stamped invitations are not a frivolity but a manifesto. I like neat things, honest things, and people who say what they mean. So when my cousin, Celeste, announced her engagement, I did something I still think was perfectly reasonable. I offered to help. Free. No strings. I want to make your day beautiful, I told her over coffee at my kitchen counter, doodling flowers in the margin of a napkin. Celeste smiled like she'd swallowed sunshine and said thank you, like it was a thing she wanted. I imagined mood boards and sample fabrics and a tiny army of mock-ups. I imagined being included. The thing about modern medicine is that it turns betrayal into pixels. I found out about the bridal shower through someone else's Instagram story. It was a loop of clips. Streamers, a cake with edible flowers, a crown of baby's breath on Celeste's head, and the caption said, "An intimate shower with those who truly support us." The people in the stories were laughing into flutes and pinning corsages on each other. There was a shot of a table, ribbons, and a hand-lettered sign. No me. Not a single tag. My first reaction was disbelieving. Glitch, surely. Maybe the tag hadn't gone through. Maybe Celeste had posted and forgotten to include me. I scrolled back through my messages. Nothing. No invite, no screenshot, no wistful side-eye, only a little icon of a paper airplane telling me I'd been left off. I called my mother Maya because that's what you do when your social world collapses into a tiny rectangle and you need someone to tell you you're overreacting or to hand you a subtle strategy to get revenge. Maya picked up on the first ring like it was Tuesday and she had better things to do. "Hey, Mom. Did you know about Celeste's shower?" My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Brittle, too polite. There was a pause, the kind that travels through air like a stone. "Yes," she said finally. "It was yesterday." Why wasn't I invited? I helped her with the invitation suite for free. I offered to. "You're always making things into drama, Gracie," she interrupted. She wanted something small. She wanted her day to be just hers. You know how Celeste is. Don't make this about you. Make this about me? I almost laughed. I literally offered to help, for free. I thought, you always think you should be the center of everything. Maya cut in, warm as butter, cold as misunderstanding. You need to pick your battles. Don't stir things up. I ended the call with a ringing in my ears that wasn't the phone. Maya didn't ask who'd been there. She didn't ask if I wanted to see pictures. She assigned me a role in the story. Drama. So I called Aunt Marin next. Aunt Marin is the family librarian of gossip. Neat handwriting, a voice that smells faintly of bergamot, and a memory that files grudges like receipts. She answered on the third ring. "Gracie," she said. There was a softness behind it, but you could tell she'd been prepared. "Did Celeste have a bridal shower?" I asked, because honestly at that point I half expected her to say no and cackle. "She did," Aunt Marin said. "It was small, very intimate, family and close friends. Was I invited?" Another pause. "No," she said slowly, and I felt the sentence fall through me like a dropped glass. Celeste wanted it to be just for those who are closest to her right now. You know how weddings are. People want certain energies. "Certain energies," I repeated. "So what? I have the wrong aura?" "It's complicated," Aunt Marin said, with the tone adults use before they hand you a thing you won't like. You and Celeste have had some distance. It's not personal. Sometimes you have to let people have their day the way they want it. Her words were carefully wrapped in kindness, the sort of kindness that could be mailed to the tone-deaf. I remember promising people a seat at the table and being left outside while the tablecloth was ironed. Aunt Marin added, almost as an afterthought, "It's been strained for a while. We all thought giving Celeste a quiet day would be best." "Who thought?" I asked. "Did anyone ask me if I wanted a quiet day? Did anyone ask me anything?" Silence, then another soft attempt at consolation. "Honey, it's family stuff. Don't take it to heart." I hung up and stared at my phone until the light died. I pictured the napkin I doodled on that day, the little vase sketch I'd titled, in my optimism, Celeste's Corner. I'd written, underneath the flower, "For you." The handwriting looked childish now, like a relic from a person who still believed in being included. There's a particular animal grief to being erased by people who used to know where you sat. It isn't stormy or cinematic. It's the tiny, precise hurt of watching a sliding door shut and realizing you were never given the handle. I wanted to call Celeste. I wanted to text asking why, to say I loved her and also, how could you? But the call felt like throwing my voice into a hurricane. So I sat on my kitchen floor, surrounded by swatches and unopened font catalogs, and let the quiet press in. That night, I dreamed of paper airplanes, little white things carrying messages that never reached me. I woke up with the taste of metal in my mouth and a new understanding. Some people will tell you you're the problem when they're the ones who left you out. The question, the one I didn't know how to ask yet, was whether I would accept being written out of my own family's story. The post went live like a guillotine. On a slow Tuesday morning, I scrolled through my feed and froze on Celeste's photo. A soft-focus snap of her in a sundress, a caption that could double as a dagger, keeping things intimate, only those who truly support us, blessed, and a string of emojis that read like a seal on a verdict. The comments were a choir of approval. No me. No acknowledgement of the napkin sketches I'd left on her counter. No thank you. For the mock-ups I'd sent her in a burst of enthusiasm. Just a picture and that sentence. Intimate equals exclusive equals coded. Within an hour, my phone buzzed like it had caught a fever. Lena, my cousin, texted, "Why weren't you at Celeste's shower? We thought you said you weren't close anymore." Short, sharp. The implication hung like a stink of burned sugar. Marco, another cousin, sent a passive-aggressive DM, "Hope you're not using family for content, Gracie." My aunt I hadn't called since moving cities forwarded Celeste's post with a single comment. "She's making her own choices." The threads multiplied, each one a small accusation, each one a tiny stone thrown at my window. And then, worse, Grandma June called. Her voice was syrupy with concern and irritation. "I heard you didn't want to support Celeste," she said, like a prosecutor reading the charge sheet aloud. "She told me you refused to help with the dresses." I tried to explain the timeline that I had offered and that I'd been left out, but Celeste's tidy version of events had already been delivered. Gracie was distant. Gracie was dramatic. Gracie had chosen not to show up. To Grandma June, who had lived through a lifetime of family stories told once and then believed forever, Celeste's voice was the one that stuck. That family narrative didn't stay inside the group chat. People talk. People embellish. Someone had taken Celeste's line, "intimate weddings with those who truly support us," and turned it into, "Gracie refused to support Celeste," which then metastasized into, "Gracie is impossible to work with." It is a strange talent of gossip to take a social omission and translate it into a character trait. The next blow came in the form of 3 client emails over the course of a week. The first was from Claire, a boutique stationery client I'd been designing for the last 6 months. Claire's voice had been bright when we started. Her message now was clipped. "We've decided to move in a different direction. Thank you for the drafts." No reason, no feedback. Just a polite disappearance. 2 days later, a wedding planner who'd been circling my portfolio for months wrote, "We're no longer able to proceed. Our team prefers vendors with proven track records of steady collaboration." The third was the worst. An inquiry I'd been grooming into a major contract, someone who wanted a full-service concept for a pop-up wedding exhibit, canceled after a forwarded screenshot of Celeste's post reached their inbox. Their note read, "We've heard concerns about your approach to family and collaboration," and that was the last I heard. One forwarded message that landed on my desk like a slap contained the phrase, "difficult to work with." The credit for that opinion, as far as I could tell, did not come from clients who had sat across my table and seen me sketch, color match, and explain why vellum matters. It came from overheard snippets, cousin commentary, and a narrative packaged to absolve one person of awkward responsibility. In the space between Celeste's caption and my client's decisions, rumor had rewritten the plot. Business is fragile in the way a soap bubble is fragile. All it takes is a pin. Over the next month, I watched a slow withdrawal of trust that I hadn't realized depended on my family's quiet goodwill. Contracts evaporated, prospective gigs cooled, leads I'd nurtured for weeks went dark. My calendar, once thick with shoots and consultations, grew sparse. The financial hit was abrupt, Enough of a dent that I had to call my accountant and add a new line item to my mental ledger called damage control. It hurt in ways that had nothing to do with money. I'd built my studio on careful, honest labor and a reputation I guarded like a favorite cactus, low maintenance but sharp when provoked. To have that reputation eroded by a story I didn't write felt obscene. Worse, it felt preventable, as if all I'd needed was a different conversation or one text saying, "We still want you," and none of this would have happened. Instead, Celeste's comfortable little post had become a fuse, and the family's reactions fed the fire. People who weren't close to the family, vendors, planners, clients, started asking me questions that meant nothing to them, but everything to me. Is there some history? Are you sure you want to associate with them? Each question was a small Brexit of trust, a quiet removing of my name from their mental Rolodex. I tried to push back. I sent messages to the cousins who'd texted accusatory things, explaining calmly the offers I'd made, the drafts I'd emailed, the hours I'd suggested meeting. Some apologized in clipped ways, others doubled down on the story they'd already chosen. I called Grandma June back and asked her to hear me. She listened, but the listening was a kind of sleepwalking. Sympathetic, but not corrective. The version of events that left me out had already been set in the family Bible. At night, I lay in the dark, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silences, and tried to assemble the math of it all. The loss wasn't just a bank balance, though yes, the bank balance mattered. It was a quiet diminishment. Fewer inquiries, fewer collaborations, and the creeping suspicion that my professional life had been folded into a family drama and then left in the wash. The rage that popped up was immediate and animal. I imagined confronting Celeste. I imagined public clarifications. I imagined sending my invoices to the group chat like confetti. But fury didn't fix calendars or bring back clients. It only made my voice louder in a room where people had already stopped listening. So I did the only thing that felt like agency. I documented. I pulled together emails, timestamps, mock-ups, and the message threads where I had offered to help. I made a record of the work I had done and the ways I had been left out. It wouldn't undo the lost contracts, but it might, someday, be proof that the story of me, as difficult, was a fiction. And while I was assembling proof, the social ripples kept arriving. Celeste posted another photo, a rehearsal dinner, a cake, a toast, and the comments now sometimes included veiled references to boundaries and protecting the bride's peace. The message people had taken away, the one that would cost me business and neat little pieces of dignity, was this: Gracie had chosen discord. The inconvenient truth, I had been excluded, kept getting edited out. By the end of that month, my inbox resembled a battlefield's aftermath. I had fewer contracts, a thinner calendar, and an exhausted feeling that ran deeper than disappointment. The family's version of events had leaked into my work life and left a stain. I realized, with the cruel clarity of a lens finally focused, that some exclusions are private and some exclusions are weaponized. The latter are what you need to defend a life against. Isa called first thing the next morning, Isa, pronounced Isa, my friend since architecture school, who treats problems like puzzles and people like fragile prototypes. Her voice was a warm hammer, steady, practical, impossible to ignore. "You're not dramatic," she said before I could explain. "You were excluded. That's not drama, that's deliberate. And everyone's leaning into a story that makes them feel righteous. Classic emotional manipulation. Textbook gaslighting, honestly." Hearing the words felt like someone finally flipping the lights on in a dark room. Gaslighting made the thing that had been gnawing at me have a name. It stopped being a fog of self-doubt and became an action other people were taking. Isa didn't try to soften it into a metaphor. She pointed to the behaviors, labeled them, and immediately offered a plan. "Come to Santa Barbara," she said. "Pack your laptop, some swatches, and bring that ridiculous collection of paper samples you keep hoarding. We'll make it a working vacation. Change of scenery, no family drama, and I know a place that needs a pop-up installation. You need a reset and maybe a new audience." There's something disarming about an offer that combines empathy and logistics. Isa's plan wasn't escape theater. It was strategy. She booked a small house with a courtyard and white lights, the kind of place with happy plants and a kitchen that invites long conversations. We left the city with my files in a canvas tote and a playlist that insisted we sing like people who hadn't been silenced. Santa Barbara smelled like salt and sun, surf on one side, vineyards on the other. The light there slices things into honest shapes. I worked. I sketched on the porch with a coffee that tasted like someone else's vacation and let the designs breathe. Isa read through my documentation, the email timestamps, mock-ups, the messages, and helped me organize an evidence packet that felt less like therapy and more like ammo. You can either keep fighting to be let in, she said while thumb indexing a stack of swatches, or you can make something people actually want to be in. Make your table, Gracie. Invite the people who want to sit at it. 2 days into the trip, I wandered into a tiny collaborative studio on State Street, the kind of place where local makers hang work that smells faintly of sawdust and ambition. Mateo was there. Mateo Rivera, a floral sculptor who runs a community makerspace, all sleeves and tattoo sketches and the kind of grin that makes you believe in lunch plans. He'd seen my portfolio pinned to a corkboard at a coffee shop and asked if I'd like to drop by to talk about an upcoming market. We talked for an hour about paper, texture, and the absurd holiness of vellum. Mateo listened like he was assembling a sculpture out of each sentence. People in this town will actually sit with your work, he said. We need an installation that lets people touch things and ask questions. I can make you a spot next weekend at the Paseo. Bring what you love. It was the opposite of being erased. It was people seeing what I do and responding with practical enthusiasm. Mateo's respect was not theatrical. It arrived in a business-like handshake and an offer to use the studio space. He introduced me to a few vendors, a ceramicist who makes plates that look like flattened moons, a photographer who shoots with old Polaroids, a baker who names her croissants after planets. They treated me like a peer, not an interloper. Working in Santa Barbara wasn't just mercantile balm. It rewired my imagination. People there liked my drafts and asked questions that were curious, not accusatory. They asked about process, budget, materials. They wanted to collaborate. I found myself sketching with ease again, the way you play a familiar song after weeks of off-key thinking. One evening, over a taco that tasted like combustion and comfort, Mateo said, "You know, you can tell a different story. No one said your family's narration has to be the final edit." His words landed and stayed. I pictured the napkin sketch again, the one I'd given Celeste. And then I imagined a new napkin, Gracie's table. It was not spiteful. It was an exercise in authorship. Isa noticed the shift in me, a slow recomposition of energy. "You don't owe them your narrative," she said. "You owe yourself one you can live in." We drafted a plan that felt part business pivot, part personal manifesto, a small, impeccably designed celebration where I could do the work I love and invite people who actually wanted to be there. A May date because spring deserves generosity. By the time we packed up to head back, I'd arranged a tiny showcase with Mateo's makerspace and taken pre-orders for a limited run of invitation suites. The market in Santa Barbara was small but fierce. People lingered at my table, fingers tracing textured paper, asking the kind of questions that heal reputations. Where did you learn that technique? Can you show me how this folds? I left Santa Barbara with more than new leads. I left with a clearer sense of who my people were. Not the ones who decided I should be invisible, but the ones who recognized my labor and wanted to be part of it. Mateo texted the morning we returned. "When you're ready to build something real, I've got space, friends, and a truck." It felt like being offered a stage and not merely a footnote. Back in my city, unpacking those swatches felt different. They were no longer relics of an offer ignored. They were material for my own table. I had proof. A network that hadn't been poisoned by family rumor, and a friend who spoke the truth plainly. The decision to make my own celebration stopped feeling like pettiness and began feeling like a clear, necessary act of self-preservation. I didn't know yet how my family would react to a woman building a party on the same date as a wedding. I only knew I would be the author of my next chapter, and for the first time in months, that felt like enough. We set the date with the kind of calm that comes after panic. May 15th, a Sunday that smelled like possibility. Mateo and I sketched the layout on his studio floor with rolls of craft paper under our knees, drawing the ceremony as if it were a map of a small kingdom we actually wanted to live in. The guest list was intentionally short. Makers, a few clients who'd become friends, Isa, Mateo's ceramicist friend Rosa, the photographer who shot in Polaroids, and maybe 2 cousins I actually liked. No drama. No people who catalog wounds. No one who mistook exclusion for character evidence. I wanted it to feel honest. We chose a backyard with low string lights that would make everyone look like they'd just stepped into a memory. Menu: a line of small plates from the baker who named croissants after planets, a lemon tart that made people apologize to their faces, and Mateo's idea, a coffee bar with hand-pressed espresso and tiny biscotti, because ceremony doesn't require pomp, it requires warmth. Design-wise, I kept it spare. Textured invitations, hand-tied place cards, and a centerpiece that was basically a quiet sculpture of native flowers and dried grasses. It was not showy. It was mine. Aunt Marin called the 3rd week of April. Her voice was a practiced mildness that slipped easily into accusation. "Gracie," she said, "we heard you're going away that weekend. Mateo and I are hosting a small celebration on May 15th, I said. I told her the plan like I always did, with the logistics out front, the aesthetic second, the emotional margin carefully folded in. A breath on the other end, quick and flat. "That's during family wedding season," she said. "Celeste's wedding is the same month. You really should consider." "Celeste's wedding is not until June," I said. I'd checked dates with a dozen vendors. I'd cleared calendars. We picked May 15 because it worked for the makers and the space. "You'll cause hurt," she warned. "People will see that date and think you planned this to conflict. It's awkward. For everyone. Then they'll see we invited." I started, but she interrupted with the sort of single-minded conviction people use when they're arguing for the version that saves them effort. "Just take down the posts. Please. It's simple. For peace." It's a funny thing, being asked to erase yourself for the comfort of others. There was the practical. My business depended on visibility. Social posts were both portfolio and proof. There was the moral. Why should my life be muted because of someone else's secrecy? There was the petty. If I bowed now, what would stop them from moving the goalposts again? I didn't agree to take anything down. I didn't say no in a battle cry. I said it with the calmness of someone who had rehearsed this refusal in the tiny theater of their head. "I'm not taking anything down," I said. "This is not to create conflict. It's a day for people who choose to be there." She tried one more thing. Guilt. People will talk. They'll think you meant to be spiteful. "I meant to be myself," I said. 2 days later, I learned the truth in a way that felt like a stagehand pulling a curtain to reveal the set. Celeste's wedding had been quietly moved to May 15th. No group announcement, no heads up, just a new date, posted like an afterthought to a cousin's private calendar, and then forwarded to Aunt Marin, who apparently decided it would be useful to press that calendar into my forehead. Someone in the family group chat, someone who still had a conscience, forwarded the calendar invite with the message, "FYI, Celeste's now the 15th. The little .ics attachment clicked open like a small trap. I stared at the date until it blurred. They hadn't told me. They'd moved a wedding to make it look like I'd moved a party. That's when the pressure turned industrial. Messages poured in, requests that I reschedule, thinly veiled accusations that I was seeking attention, and a kind of exhausted entitlement from the relatives who'd already decided the story. Aunt Marin called again, voice thinner now, almost pleading. "Gracie, we're only asking you to be reasonable." I said what I needed to say, clean and slow. They moved their date without telling me. If you're asking me to cancel my event because of something you hid from me, that's not reasonable. That's manipulation. There was a long silence on the line, the kind that signals someone attempting to reconfigure their pet narrative. "We're only trying to keep the peace," she said finally. "Peace built on secrecy is a lie," I replied. "I will not erase myself because it's more convenient for other people to avoid talking." The requests escalated into propositions. My mother texted, "Maybe a compromise? Attend the reception? Post that you celebrated earlier?" Aunt Marin floated attending only Celeste's reception if I canceled my party. The subtext was loud and clear. "We will allow you a smaller, lesser place if you show contrition." I thought about all the little ways I'd been coaxed over the years into minimizing myself. Smaller portions, quieter laughs, the apologetic preface to any ask. I remembered offering my labor for free and being turned into a villain. I thought of Mateo kneeling over a roll of brown craft paper, drawing me a floor plan for a life that included light. I declined the compromise. Not loudly, not theatrically. I declined because my work is an extension of me, a public list of what I value, and because standing down would teach them that erasure works. I'm not canceling, I told my mother. If you want to come to Celeste's wedding, you can. If you want to come to mine, you can. Don't ask me to vanish for convenience. There was a final attempt at arm twisting. The old family handbook opened to the page that reads, "Do the thing that avoids fuss." But I was done feeling responsible for everyone else's comfort at the price of my integrity. So we moved forward. Invitations were printed and addressed in my careful, slightly obsessive script. Mateo sourced local bistro tables and a hand-loomed rug that would anchor the ceremony. Isa wrote a short note that read like a permission slip for joy. Be there. Bring your best self. I posted a single photo, an invitation stack tied with twine and sprigs of dried lavender, with the caption, May 15th, a small night to be together. I kept the tone gentle, not accusatory. Visibility, I'd learned, was not aggression. It was evidence. If they wanted to paint me as the villain for holding a small, honest party on a day some of them had secretly chosen to occupy, that was their choice. I'd reached the point where I cared less about their interpretation and more about my authorship. May 15th was not a provocation. It was a decision. They had given me the option to fade. I chose instead to show up. They say lies travel faster than truth because they're lighter. Less baggage, no receipts. For a while, that seemed true. The story that suited Celeste and Aunt Marin moved through the family like a well-oiled rumor machine. Then small fissures began to show where people bumped into contradictions. It started with whispers. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in months sent a message that began oddly with an apology. Hey, I might have heard things wrong. Can we talk? Another cousin pulled me aside at a farmer's market and, with the guilty look of someone who just swatted a fly, said, Marin was so sure you refused to help. I don't know why she told us that. Word spreads that someone is doubting the official story, and suddenly everyone who'd once nodded in chorus started looking at their own notes. Then Grandma June called. Gracie? Her voice was thin, the way it is when she's chosen to be stern rather than sentimental. I've been thinking. Celeste told me you didn't want to be involved, but then I saw the invitations she posted online and, well, tell me your side. I told it plainly. I told her about the napkin sketches, about the emails with mock-ups, about calling everyone and getting drama for an answer. I didn't lace it in indignation. I laid out evidence like plates on a table. She listened. When I finished, there was a long, slow inhale on the line, like someone putting together a jigsaw puzzle and realizing a few pieces were missing. I'm sorry you've been hurt, she said finally. I should have asked. That admission felt unmoored and beautiful, like rain after a long drought. It didn't fix everything, but it loosened the tightness in my chest a degree. Her willingness to listen created an opening. People began to ask questions they hadn't been willing to ask before. Was everyone sure they'd heard the whole story? Did anyone check? Where had the "you refused" line come from? Aunt Marin and Mom arrived the next afternoon, carrying casserole dishes and the kind of faces that had been trained for persuasion. Aunt Marin looked practiced. Nice cardigan, calm voice. Mom's eyes had the soft impatience of someone who believed a problem could be negotiated away with small sacrifices. We thought maybe we could reach a compromise, Mom started, setting down a tin of something that smelled like nostalgia. Maybe you could attend Celeste's reception. It's a way to show family unity. Aunt Marin folded her hands as if composing a hymn. We're not asking you to disappear, Gracie. Just minimize. Attend the reception. We'll all be together. I felt their words like a hand cupping water and squeezing. Attend the reception if I cancel my event, Aunt Marin said. It's really a small ask. It hit me then how gracefully they'd learned to package erasure as a bargain. Cancel my thing, and we'll give you an appearance. Make myself small to make them comfortable. I invited them to sit. I had prepared for this meeting in the way a designer prepares a client presentation. Evidence, mood, end state. It felt theatrical and necessary. I pulled out the invitation stack from the box where I'd been keeping them like a talisman. Textured paper, handwritten calligraphy, twine, dried lavender. I laid the vendor confirmations across the coffee table. Mateo's studio invoice, Rosa's ceramic deposit, the photographer's contract, the caterer's menu. I also placed a small portfolio I'd compiled. Recent clients, a note from a planner who'd appreciated my work after the Santa Barbara pop-up, a printed email from a boutique who'd revived their inquiry after seeing my market photos. Aunt Marin touched the edge of an invitation with a kind of pious curiosity. "This is lovely," she admitted, the sentence pulled through molasses. Her eyes flicked to the portfolio. "You've been busy." "Yes." My voice was steady. "I've been working. I had to pick up new clients after some contracts fell through. I've made new connections. This isn't a vanity project. It's work, and these are contracts and relationships that matter to me." Mom's posture shifted. For a second, the defender's mask fell, and I saw something like consternation. Not at me, but at the consequences of choices she'd helped enable. "You could still come to Celeste's reception," Mom tried. "It's not mutually exclusive." "It is," I said. "If I show up at someone else's wedding in a way that says I'm only here because I was asked to defer, that's not honest to me or to the people I'm inviting. I'm not canceling my event to make a false peace." Aunt Marin tried a softer tactic. Humiliation disguised as concern. "People will talk," she murmured. "They'll think you did it on purpose." "I already know they're talking," I replied. "I've documented the offers I made to Celeste. I've compiled what I did and when. I'm not asking you to take my side. I'm asking you to be truthful about your part." There was a long silence. Then, surprisingly, Aunt Marin's composure shifted. She looked, frankly, small. For the first time in months, I saw not the strategist of the family, but a woman confronting the consequences of a convenience she'd chosen. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said, voice quieter than I'd heard it. "We wanted to spare Celeste. Drama. I didn't realize the story that would form." "You wanted peace," I said. "But creating peace by erasing someone else is just a different kind of violence." Mom reached across the coffee table and touched my hand. It wasn't the soft, dismissive pat I'd gotten on the phone. It was heavier, more real. "Maybe we handled this poorly," she said. "We thought we were protecting her happiness." "I want to protect mine too," I replied. "And I want to protect the people who hired me because of the work I do." That seemed to land. Aunt Marin's expression flickered between defensiveness and something like contrition. She cleared her throat and said, "I suppose we didn't understand the professional impact. We saw a disagreement and assumed it was personal." "It became personal because you made it personal for everyone," I said. "You gave people a narrative, and narratives are sticky. They become definitions." They left with the casserole barely touched and the air between us rearranged. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was the first time they'd admitted their choice had consequences beyond the family living room. After they went, my phone pinged with a message from Marco, the cousin who'd once accused me of using family for content. "Hey," it read, "I'm sorry. I didn't know. Want to come by and chat before May?" Small fissures become avalanches when gravity does its honest work. Other relatives started asking quieter questions. A few offered backhanded apologies. Some wanted to know, awkwardly, if I could do a small favor for a cousin's shower. The tone had shifted from condemnation to curiosity, which is almost always the precursor to actual accountability. But the real turning point came when those who had dismissed my work were confronted by the thing they had refused to see: evidence of my success. A friend in the design community forwarded a link to a local blog that had featured a write-up of my Santa Barbara pop-up, a tasteful piece that called my invitations tactile diplomacy and praised my knack for intimate ceremony design. The link made the rounds. People in the family saw that I'd been invited to speak at a small design showcase, and that social proof, more convincing than any argument, made them reconsider the earlier, easier story. Aunt Marin texted later that week, "Can we talk? I want to understand more about how this affected your work." She wasn't asking to shame me anymore. She was asking to learn. I agreed to meet, but on my terms. No arm twisting, no bargaining chips. If they came with apologies and willingness to listen, I would receive them. If they came with demands or dismissal, I would not. When we met, I didn't perform magnanimity. I was firm and clear. I showed them my contracts, the deposit receipts, and the blog piece. I explained the cascade, how a caption had become a character weapon, how people had believed it because it was easier. I didn't demand they unspool every lie. I asked them to stop telling it and to correct it when they could. Aunt Marin's face did that thing. People's faces do when they understand they were complicit in something avoidable. It flushed, then softened. "I'm sorry," she said, and this time the words carried weight. Mom, too, offered something like an apology, not the performative kind, but a smaller, truer version that felt like an attempt at repair instead of an attempt to avoid mess. I accepted the apologies because they were offered, and because living in a perpetual state of refusal would hollow me out. But I did not accept the bargain to shrink. I showed them, gently but without theatrics, the seating list, the care I'd put into cozying up the space, the way Mateo had sourced chairs so neighbors with bad knees could come. I explained why the event mattered, not as a petty rebuttal, but as a craft celebration and a professional milestone. They left with an understanding that was awkward but real. They hadn't been forced to change their minds by grand gestures. They'd been invited to see a different truth, and slowly had chosen to look. When the knocks on my door finally came, they were not all condemnation. Some were curious, some awkward. A few cousins stopped by and asked how they could make amends. That was the world I'd been insisting on all along. People showing up for the messy work of recreating a story that had been untrue. I kept preparing. The invitations were sealed, the table layout set, Mateo and Isa were on standby for last-minute heroics. I'd defended my right to exist in the family's orbit without being its captive. The choice to stand was no longer a lone, bitter act. It had the small companion of truth and a handful of real allies. As May 15 approached, I felt the odd mix of nerves and relief that comes when you finally stop performing to please others and start performing for the people who actually want to be in your life. The family had tried to make me vanish for convenience. I had decided to be inconvenient instead, to be visible, to be honest, and to let the chips fall where they would. The only real question left was whether our small, honest party would be enough to change the conversation for good. May 15th arrived quietly. Sunlight through the curtains, a breeze that smelled like lemon and rosemary, and not a single text from the family group chat. Which was a blessing. Silence, after months of noise, can sound like applause. Mateo arrived early with armfuls of flowers, and Isa brought a speaker and a playlist she'd named Reclamation. We hung string lights in slow circles, the courtyard glowing like something out of a memory that hadn't happened yet. Guests trickled in. Clients, collaborators, friends. Every one of them looked genuinely happy to be there, not performing happiness for the camera. When the music started, I realized what I'd built wasn't revenge. It wasn't even protest. It was an ecosystem, a living proof that belonging doesn't have to be inherited. It can be designed. People laughed, touched the hand-pressed invitations, took Polaroids by Mateo's flower installation. I stood near the coffee bar, twine still on my wrist from tying the last batch of napkins, and felt the first real quiet peace I'd known in months. Halfway through the evening, Isa handed me her phone. "You're on a blog," she said, grinning. A local wedding site had posted a feature. Designer Gracie crafts the anti-wedding, a celebration of authentic connection. It wasn't mocking. It was reverent. Photos of our space, the paper textures, the candles, the small, sincere faces, filled the article. The post began circulating, and by the next morning, my inbox had more inquiries than I'd seen all year. Word, as it always does, traveled back to the family. A few days later, Aunt Marin and Celeste showed up at my studio. I half expected fireworks, but they came with that awkward air of people who have seen their narrative start to crumble. Celeste's tone was brittle. "You could have told me," she said, like I'd somehow stolen her thunder. "I tried," I said simply. "You just preferred the version where I was the problem." They didn't have much to say after that. Maybe they realized the story they'd told had grown legs and wandered too far to control. Maybe they just couldn't recognize me anymore, the woman who no longer needed their permission to exist. A few weeks later, I was invited to headline a design showcase in Los Angeles. The email called me a leading voice in intimate event design. It made me laugh. A year ago, I was being called difficult. Now I was being asked to speak about authenticity in art. The symmetry was almost comedic. I moved in with Mateo that summer. His studio had a spare room that looked out over the coast, and we turned it into a workspace full of drafts and wildflowers. My business thrived again, not because of revenge, but because I stopped trying to earn the love of people who needed me small. Sometimes I still hear murmurs about Celeste's wedding, the one that shared my date. People say it went fine, though the photos look oddly staged, as if everyone was smiling for insurance. I don't envy it. When I think back, the thing that surprises me most isn't how cruel people can be. It's how peaceful life becomes once you stop explaining your worth to those committed to misunderstanding it. Family taught me about exclusion. Friends taught me about creation. Between those two lessons, I built something better than reconciliation, a life designed by my own hands.